I'm going to be talking today about the terrible beauty of the brain and how it responds to stress, and the terrible beauty of it in terms of it is an amazing, beautiful system, but it can cause some terrible problems in modern society. It's a real pleasure to be here today and out in this beautiful setting, and it reminds us that as modern humans in society, we come out to these natural places to seek peace and refuge and respite, and it's very easy for us to forget that for the great majority of living things, life in nature is a day-to-day battle where survival from one day to the next depends critically on being able to survive from what's trying to eat you. And so whether it's a single-celled organism and a paramecium that's perfectly designed to try to escape an amoeba predator, or up through the evolutionary chain, we're wired to be able to survive these life threats. If we cannot survive and get away from the thing that's trying to kill us, then there is no tomorrow. It's the most essential thing. And really the design of our brains has been shaped, I would say, above all else, or as much by this as by anything, in terms of, or by the need to maximize our likelihood of surviving a life-threatening situation, being able to survive when it's all on the line. We can take the example of a rabbit out in the field to show or to sort of illustrate how our brains are designed in such a marvelous and magnificent fashion. So imagine Mr. Rabbit out there, or Miss Rabbit just munching away on some grass. All of a sudden, they see a fox 10 feet away in prowl mode, and they know that they are about to live or die, depending on what happens next. So how is the brain designed to help us all as mammals to be able to be perfectly positioned to be able to try to survive these life-threatening situations? And we could ask, what are the initial ways that the brain is able to achieve profound changes in how we think and how we feel to be able to help us survive these initial critical minutes? And what is the way that our brains change so that we're subsequently able to do and function best in the subsequent, if we do survive those initial minutes, in the subsequent hours and days to be able to go on and survive what's trying to kill us? So I want you all to take a second, and I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to think about where you were a little over 16 years ago on September 11th, 2001, when you heard that the Twin Towers had been struck. And I want you to pull as much as you can, as much detail as you can to mind about where you were, what exactly the situation was, what room you were in, what place you were in, who told you, as much detail as you can. Great. Open your eyes. What I think you'll find is that you have very exquisite memories. You remember exactly what you were doing. I was driving down Miller Road in Ann Arbor, Michigan, listening to NPR, heard it come on the road. I can picture the inside of the car. I can picture so much detail. I want you to do another thing for me. Close your eyes for just a second and imagine where you were on October 11th, 2001, or August 11th, 2001. Or November 11th, 2001. Our brains are entirely shaped by our need to remember things that are stressful. If I don't remember where that bear was in the woods when I was walking that way, and I go that way again, that is a situation that makes me much less likely to survive tomorrow. I have to remember events that could have killed me. I have to remember stressful things. That's how we are as humans designed. We're not designed to remember August 11th, 2001. We're designed to never forget where we were when we were hearing about that event on September 11th, 2001. And one can think about the brain changes and the ways that our brains are magnificently designed as mammals to be able to respond to these events. Again, the profound changes that happen immediately and then subsequently. You have, as we've just said, profound changes in memory. You're never going to forget the details of that stressful event. Also, as we're familiar with, dramatic improvements in alertness. Look, right now you could be thinking about which wine you're going to be drinking, the amazing music to come. You could be half asleep. It doesn't matter. But if a bear came around the edge of that tent, you guys would be all wide awake. You'd be vividly. We've all had that near miss on the road that's like 15 cappuccinos mainlined into our artery, right? Where that car almost hits us. Dramatic changes in our function based on this exposure to this stressful event. Similarly, we're all familiar with the soldier that didn't notice the injury till after the firefight. Even in football, the guy who doesn't know the injury till after the game. Profound reductions in pain and pain sensitivity that have been well demonstrated in animal models and in humans in the midst of a stressful event. And again, reductions in anxiety. If I am so paralyzed by fear of that fox and thinking, oh my gosh, something really bad could happen, oh my gosh, and just paralyzed, that's not going to be very useful. So we get this remarked dramatic changes in our function due to these marked dramatic changes in our brains from the moment of a stressful event. So let's say that we're the rabbit, and let's say we survive the fox. We get away, we survive the initial, we've all seen the images on the Serengeti of the lion chasing the zebra, biting at it, gouging at it, grabbing at it. It's not a one moment and it's a done. It's the two of them. Sometimes the zebra gets away, sometimes the zebra doesn't get away. It fights. If it does get away, what does it need to do? What do we need to do? Well, how do we need to be wired to be able to survive these events in terms of what's optimal in terms of our wiring for the coming, from an evolutionary perspective and going back in time, what would have been optimal for us out on the Serengeti? Well, it would be really critical to be very anxious. If that rabbit's like, nah, that fox is probably gone, I'm taking a nap, and is just totally out, those foxes, their progenitors didn't necessarily survive. Maybe the fox isn't gone. The foxes, the rabbits that are under the bush and constantly looking around and anxious and could be back and are that way, are for hours and some time after that stressful event. That's an adaptive advantage that's going to increase the likelihood of survival. The same with if you don't want to be in that deep slumber. So all these things are adaptive. Increased pain, it's well appreciated that reduction in pain, I think people are familiar with that idea of I didn't notice the injury till after the game. It's much less well appreciated that there's a just as equally dramatic increase in our pain sensitivity, that our brain completely changes our wiring in the hours and days and weeks after a stressful event to be much more sensitive to pain. And that's because out there on the Serengeti, throughout evolution, if you've got an injury, you need to know to rest it. You can't be walking on that injured limb. You gotta know it's gotta really hurt so that you'll protect it. Similarly, there's a lot of that animal's not out wandering around. It needs to go to rest under a bush. It needs to sort of withdraw into itself. Some behaviors that we might look at as humans and say, well, it seems kind of sad. It's curled up and it's over. It's not with its herd. It's not with its sort of mates. It's over, curled up under this bush. It's got an injury. It's just withdrawing into itself. All these dramatic changes that our brain achieves in response to a stressful event. And we know now some things about this. We know, for example, that a single molecule, one type of molecule, for example, a catecholamine molecule, a sort of adrenergic molecule, achieves multiple different effects. One molecule, multiple different effects across different systems in the brain. So the same molecule, for example, will reduce pain and markedly increased alertness and be critical in terms of achieving a memory or forming a memory that never is going to be forgotten. Similarly, it's such a beautiful system. It's just awe-inspiring to study. That opioid molecule that's released at the moment of that the rabbit sees the fox, that opioid molecule that's released that reduces pain, reduces anxiety, also circulating around all of our bodies, on all of the blood vessels of our bodies, there's little opioid receptors. And when they're bound to by opioids, they start to stimulate angiogenesis. Because from an evolutionary perspective and throughout most of history, if you're in pain and there's stress, there's also an injury. So your body's already working to do its very best to help you heal as quickly as possible. So just these amazing changes, and really maybe perhaps most stunning, you have things where in all of our bodies and throughout this stress response and in our brains, you have these dramatic, different responses I've described. For example, you have a marked reduction in pain, and then you have a marked increase in pain. You have increased alertness, and then increased anxiety. So just these polar opposite effects, they're achieved by the same molecule. We used to not know, is it molecule A that does decrease pain, and then molecule B that comes on and achieves increased pain? No, it's really the same molecules that have these completely different effects on the brain and in the body in a very time-dependent fashion. So that opioid causes marked reductions in pain initially, and then after a few hours, it causes marked increases in pain. We see this in sexual assault survivors. Sexual assault survivors, women who have a genetic polymorphism that make them, genetic variant that make them less less affected by endogenous opioids, their own opioids that their brain releases. They have less initial reduction in pain at the time of around the time of sexual assault, but they're also less vulnerable to all of the increases in pain and somatic symptoms that rape survivors experience, for example. So we see that these same is true for, we used to think, catecholamines reduced pain. We used to think, glucocorticoids or steroids were anti-inflammatory. Nope, it's all just a time-dependent fashion. When people say, we have an opioid epidemic, opioids aren't just pain suppressing, that's because opioids weren't designed by your body to be pain suppressants. They were designed by your body, by the evolutionary process, to increase your likelihood of surviving a life threat. So they need to cause reduction in pain and then marked increases in pain. That's what helped us survive. So the design of our brains to so dramatically change function in response to stress has helped our ancestors, your ancestors, all of our ancestors survive countless life or death situations. You can imagine over the eons, all of our evolutionary ancestors that led to you sitting there and all of the brushes with death that they've had to overcome. These systems have been profoundly advantageous in helping to do that and helping to make that happen, all up through development. However, this extreme alterability of our brains to stress, the fact that our brains are so plastic, so changeable in response to stress, also creates the vulnerabilities that cause this tremendous global burden of suffering that we're not able to, that we're struggling with so much as humanity today. And whether it's the death of a loved one, or people who were affected by the explosions in London yesterday, or the sexual assault survivor, or one of our brave servicemen and women who's long out of service but still affected on a day-to-day basis and their quality of life markedly diminished. Or even from last week, Hurricane Harvey survivors. We see the burden of these stress-related problems that are cause such tremendous suffering in our society and around the world. For example, it's amazing these changes in memory that I described. The difference between what you can remember from September 11th, 2001 and what you can remember from October 11th. That's remarkable, the difference between those two things. But that profound memory plasticity that occurs around stress also causes a subset of people with stressful experiencing profound stress to be left with re-experiencing the event again and again. We have a woman in North Carolina in one of our studies a man broke into her apartment. She locked herself in her bathroom. He broke into the bathroom, sexually assaulted her. She's chosen for the past 6 or 7 months after the accident and despite treatment to walk 3 blocks to a gas station near her to use that bathroom because she can't go into her own bathroom because when she goes into her bathroom, she's plunged right back into the experience as if it's happening again. We see this being revved up that helps the rabbit survive when it's injured and resting under a bush. It's on edge. It's looking around. It's ready for that fox to come back. That's adaptive and helps the rabbit to survive. The problem is we have our wonderful servicemen and women that could come to an event like this in the most beautiful, relaxing setting possible 3 months after serving our country, and they would it would be for them like they're in Fallujah, about to go around the corner. Because there's no difference to them, like one of them said to me, between home time and wartime. It's all become wartime. They never can get off of that knife edge. What a tremendous cost that they pay every day for having to live like that. And we need to be able to do better. We need to be able to prevent those adverse events from happening. Here, we heard this last week, all the kids back in Houston, they're not studying well. They're not focusing in school. They've got all of these revved up symptoms, another example of this hyperarousal stuff I'm talking about. The pain and somatic symptoms. Our wiring is set so that a stressful event dramatically changes our neurosensory processing, dramatically changes our pain sensitivity. Again, first plunges it and reduces it, then markedly heightens it. We've got tons of sexual assault survivors, tons of military veterans, loads of people who, after a stressful event, that develop all these aches and pains all over their body. We have done studies, prospective cohort studies. These are 2 prospective cohort studies that have very similar distributions of musculoskeletal pains after their traumatic event. You see that rates of neck and back pain and arm pain and leg pain in terms of the percentage is very similar. One group is 1,000 people who are in a car accident, and another group are hundreds of women who were sexually assaulted. The specifics of the event are much less influential, we find, on all of these pain outcomes than the stress. It's amazing how we can be rewired and have all these symptoms. And of course, historically, the sexual assault survivor comes in 6 months after being sexually assaulted, goes to their doctor, aches and pains all over. You're just kind of you've got psychological problems. You know, the dismissal of these pain and somatic symptoms has been a real problem. And again, we see all of this explosion among trauma survivors of all of these different types of symptoms that we see the same, and this is a theme that you've heard this morning from Jeff's description of track TBI from us. We see that vulnerability to adverse brain outcomes occurs after going through a tremendous stress and can occur after going through brain injury. And what we need to do is understand how each of them can cause it on their own, what happens when they occur together. So for example, we see that more than 7 in 10 of our sexual assault survivors, women who've been sexually assaulted, if you look 3 months after the sexual assault, more than 7 in 10 report 4 or more new clinically significant symptoms such as these kinds of somatic. I just don't think like I used to. I don't think as clearly as I used to. I'm very sensitive much more to light. I'm nauseous all the time. All of these changes in wiring that we see that we've got to learn how to prevent. And as we've heard, and has been another theme, that we see such overlap in these conditions. Unfortunately, as Jeff alluded to, they've traditionally been studied these different brain problems by different groups of doctors. You have post-traumatic stress, go see the psychiatrist. You have pain, go to the pain clinic. We got a pain clinic at our university, anesthesiologists, great people, they'll help you out. Somatic and cognitive symptoms, neurology clinic. Yep, we got a neurology clinic for those kinds of post-concussive, post-traumatic symptoms. So just completely fragmented care for one brain that's been through this crucible of this experience and has had these changes, and we need to look at it comprehensively. Because if you can find someone after traumatic, if you can find a rape survivor, if you can find someone who's had a sudden death of a loved one who's suffering from these symptoms, or one of our men and women, or one of our hurricane survivors who have just one of these, it's like reportable because they don't occur that way. They occur in clusters, and we saw how just one molecule can affect all of these different systems at once. So how would a concerted evolutionary response that's developed not occur coincidentally when there's problems? So really what we see is that these stressful events, unfortunately, our brains are wired to have this amazing changeability in response to stress to help us, and that has helped our ancestors survive all these events. And yet we see that it creates this vulnerability along with it. And we see, while I've just had time today to talk about a few of these outcomes, some post-traumatic stress or pain or somatic and cognitive symptoms, most depression occurs after a stressful event. We know also that substance abuse is much more common after stressful events, that some rates of psychosis are markedly higher after, markedly higher after experiencing a profound stress during development, and same with bipolar disorder. So while there's a tremendous need to be able to understand and prevent these outcomes, there's also opportunity with that to learn much more about the brain as we develop these different opportunities. But if you're a Hurricane Harvey survivor, or you were hit by Irma, or you were in London on the subway yesterday when the bomb went off, when the bucket bomb went off, and you show up to the Red Cross tent, the aid tent, the ER, we can't identify who's at high risk. You come in for sexual assault care today. If you came in for sexual assault care in 1970 to me in my emergency department working, I could give you medicine to prevent pregnancy. I can give you medicine to prevent infection. I can't give you anything to prevent post-traumatic stress, even though it occurs in more than 80% of sexual assault survivors, profoundly affects their ability to function. Can't do anything about it. Can't tell who's high risk. Couldn't do that 40 years ago. Can't do that today. So we need to be able to do much better to identify who is going to be at risk of developing these problems after they develop. We don't know how they develop. Even if I could tell that you are high risk today for one of these outcomes, we don't have the knowledge of biology that we need to develop effective interventions and treatments. We lack the brain-based diagnostics, the kind of really exciting work that Jeff's talking about and that One Mind has made possible with their FDA work with the FDA to develop brain-based diagnostics for traumatic brain injury. We need to develop brain-based diagnostics for these different stress-related disorders, these problems that occur in us humans because of how our brains change in response to stress. And we need to develop effective preventative and treatment interventions. So these are really the critical things so that we can improve people's lives on the ground, because we don't want papers on a shelf. It all is a matter of actually what do people who are going to experience, unfortunately, these types of events every day, what do they need right now? So thankfully, the National Institute of Mental Health, under the leadership of Tom and Josh, have initiated a major effort to try to understand and address those 4 needs by funding the largest ever effort of its kind to look at problems that develop among survivors of traumatic stress, which is the Aurora study. Aurora is, we've heard of today about the large scale needed for these studies to be able to look at subtypes effectively. So we're enrolling 5,000 trauma survivors. We know we need to start very early. Some of these types of outcomes that in the animal lab can only be intervened on or prevented if one initiates intervention in the very early aftermath to have the best chance. So we're starting to enroll people within the hours after their injury and starting to get data on them then. We know it has to be patient-centered. We can't just be focused on depression or just be focused on pain or just be focused on somatic symptoms. We need to look broadly to build from a brain-centered basis. And we've designed it to be very efficient, both by having adaptive sampling to ensure that most people who are in the study that we're spending the money on are people who are developing a problem, the kind of people we want to learn from to help others, and critically to make it open science so that we can get all the best people in the world mining the data. And as Josh alluded to, as Jeff alluded to, the problem so often is getting a great data set. It's not that there aren't terrific scientists in the world that could analyze it, it's that no one has the data. No one has a large comprehensive study that's out there that one can mine. Connor's amazing work is a great example of that, what he can do with 1,000 brain scans. And it's got to be comprehensive and biologically based. We know that we have to get many layers of data from individuals to understand. We have to look at the genomics paired with the neurocircuits, paired with their experiential data, paired with their symptoms to really have a comprehensive picture. So that's the goal of Aurora. We're trying to study these outcomes and these individual outcomes that develop in individuals, these different types of problems. And with each different type of outcome group, we're hoping to look at a very comprehensive assessment of each of these different types of outcomes. So with each of these different outcomes, we're going to be looking at brain imaging and brain circuits. We're going to be looking at serial DNA changes. We're going to be looking at repeated blood collection for blood-based biomarkers and diagnostics. And we're going to be looking at getting continuous physiologic monitoring so we can assess over time what's going on with the individual and get very in-depth assessment of their experiences and of their symptoms in ways that have never been able to be done before. And that's really been possible through collaborations that we've developed with Verily, the medical arm of Google, who's been providing us with these amazing wristwatches that collect all sorts of nervous system data and other information about the individual over time, and through collaborating with Tom Insel's new company, Mindstrong, that has been able to get experiential data from people's smartphones. There's an amazing study, my smartphone knows my GPA, that's out of Dartmouth College, but it's amazing the amount of information you get about people's lives and how they're living it from their smartphone data. And through Aurora data, we're hoping to get information that will allow us to tackle the challenges that we've been talking about in terms of things from biomarkers to diagnostics and treatments. OneMind has been spectacular in this effort. As much and as generous as and as far-sighted as NIMH has been, both in terms of creating this opportunity for the study and in terms of Tom Insel and Josh promoting a very unit-based approach to this. We're looking at all the different subtypes, a subtype-based approach to this. There are shortfalls and stopgaps that would otherwise really leave us short of being able to truly address those 4 challenges and really earnestly try to address those 4 challenges to be able to have that thing for the next hurricane in the future so that someone can come in and get those things. And OneMind's been amazing at filling in those gaps and providing funding that provide that critical need. And as Jeff alluded to, what's just as exciting is they've linked us up with Jeff Manley and the Track TBI folks to create this mega consortium to standardize all of our data collection across this brain injury study and this traumatic stress study so that we can get one comprehensive database to be able to really take us to the next level so that rape survivor of tomorrow can come in, can get risk stratified for their outcome, and can get a treatment so that just like today, we can prevent pregnancy and infection, tomorrow we can prevent all these other sequelae and not have people walking 3 blocks to use a gas station bathroom. We really think it's an exciting opportunity to tackle brain health, and extremely grateful to you for the opportunity to talk to you today. Thanks so much.